Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. Today is a special episode in which we are covering Provocateur Alfred Hitchcock, just in time for the holidays. I had this idea a couple of weeks ago for actually my friend Zig and I to do together. And he was going to make me watch Torn Curtain and Topaz. So I am grateful that instead of Christopher, shout out to him, I am recording this with Satchel, who is a lover of Hitchcock. And Satchel, tell us what you told me last time that we first chatted about what Hitchcock means to you and how you sort of got into his films.
Okay, yeah. So,
Good
Hitchcock,
introduction. Yeah.
yeah, very
Hi.
awkward. Yes. Hi. Yeah, Hitchcock. I liked him okay when I first started getting into movies. I thought he was good. He directed older movies, so I always thought he was a little bit slower. But recently I've kind of shifted from watching movies to kind of figure out if I like them to watching movies to kind of figure out what the director is kind of how he's trying to tell the story, if that makes any sense. And Hitchcock was a little bit of a revelation. He is the best I think I've come across. He has some stuff that he does that I think is really, really, really brilliant that people talk about, but I don't think people quite hit on how deeply brilliant some of that stuff is. And I would love to talk a little bit about some of that today, just getting into movies like Vertigo and such. But yeah,
I just watched.
Yes, and that's a nutty movie, isn't it? It's a crazy one.
It's very fresh. Well, I don't know if you know this, or if I need to like Google this, but the car that she drives, that Kim Novak drives, I'm almost positive is the car in North by Northwest. Literally same color. It's like an emerald green. I should have looked this up, but it's an emerald green car that happens when Cary Grant is in the cornfield. There's a car that comes and it's the exact same color. I think it's the exact same model. And then it's the car that she drives in this movie.
Oh, that's interesting. Interesting. Oh, yeah. I didn't catch that. Okay, yeah, I'm going to have to go.
Well, it helps to marathon. I will say to watch this many back to back, like I have been for the past 2 weeks, has really been useful, especially in noticing how Hitchcock is with color. Yes. They pop, you know, and especially these. So just to let everybody know, what we're going to be focusing on mainly are the films of the 50s, because that's what Satchel's favorite decade is, right, for him. So a lot of these are very, very colorful, and they wouldn't have been if we had done the 40s.
No, it's that early. I mean, they're still kind of figuring out Technicolor then. So everything, it's like, you think about Wizard of Oz and stuff like that, where it's just like, oh yeah, we can really play with this and really make everything look like a candy shop. And it's a lot of fun to see just kind of these things we consider to be kind of mundane, like streets of San Francisco and stuff like that, just really come to life in these Technicolor environments. But yeah. Vertigo, though, that's a fun movie because I didn't like it too much when I first saw it back in the day, and then the key to that movie was I saw it with a film class a few months later, and I have never heard an audience react as viscerally as that audience did to the last couple seconds of that movie. It was just like I knew what was coming, but none of them did, and just hearing literally people just shout, "Oh my God!" when it happened, it's like. Okay, yeah, this is good.
I wonder what it is, because I am not a Vertigo fan. I've never really liked the movie very much, and I'm in the minority there massively because it's like not just considered one of Hitchcock's best movies, but one of the greatest films ever made. And I noticed today that, I mean, every shot is perfect and it feels lush and gorgeous, and I think it's just the plot. I don't know if that's the thing that, or the characters. I don't know if that's what you didn't like at first, but that's what puts me off so much in the script.
Well, it's a weird, I mean, it's a very strange movie in a lot of ways, because what I found initially off-putting about it, and still to this day is something that it's not something I don't like anymore, but it's just kind of strange, is the movie, Hitchcock Hitchcock is very famous for using his MacGuffins, but the movie, this one in particular, it just kind of takes a left turn at some point, and it just becomes something that wasn't really being built up. It starts off as this ghost story, and then it becomes this weird perverted romance that you look at, and from kind of an objective perspective, it can be a little bit frustrating because you look at both of the characters and you're like, I would never act this way in this situation. I'm not feeling emotionally why this is taking place. It's a movie. The reason I wanted you to watch it so much is because I love talking about it, though. It's a very interesting movie. But um, one of the things about Hitchcock, one of the things actually that drew me to do this podcast is as I've studied him, I've become more and more perplexed about the kind of cultural conversations surrounding him. There's a lot of like interpretations of his movies that people seem to hold as just being objectively correct. But I don't completely understand. And Vertigo is definitely in that camp. So it's usually talked about as this movie that is about obsession. That's what Vertigo is about. I mean, for God's sake, De Palma did like a riff on it called Obsession. It's like
called Obsession. Yes.
Yeah. That's what people talk about with Vertigo, which I've never completely kind of, I guess nowadays especially understood. I think so. 2 years before Vertigo came out, John Ford made The Searchers, which I think might be the greatest movie about obsession ever made. I mean, just this story about this man who can't get away from this passion of finding this girl, and just about how that just destroys his life pretty much. I mean, that to me is about obsession. Vertigo is about this man who kind of goes down this spiral, but it's much more about these kind of imitations of the past that we deal with, and not so much about the, I guess, psychological grounding of that, just kind of observing the pattern and not really putting a deeper analysis into it and really looking at the way that it affects our lives, if that makes any sense.
It does. And this is something that I was recently chatting about with my buddy Frank, and he was making a list of on Letterboxd of movies where the main character needs to know. It's called Need to Know, and we were talking about this movie Red Rooms, which just came out, where she's like obsessive about finding out what's going on to the point where like the lines are kind of blurry morally. And so I think Vertigo is definitely in that camp of like he needs to know, but maybe I think what I'm hearing you say is that maybe the source of that energy is not so much obsession as it is trying to replicate something that has been lost.
Yes. Yeah,
like that's the part you're focusing on rather than like the first half.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a ghost story, even though the first half is a more literal ghost story. It's a movie about the way that we kind of try to bring the past back into our lives. It's weird. How do I put this into words? So looking at the movie kind of structurally. So the first half is, I mean, many people talk about this, is literally kind of a movie. You get this appearance of this woman, and he begins to believe in this appearance to a certain way, to the point where it kind of drives him insane in a way. And he starts to go down this rabbit hole of a fantasy. I've always thought that it reminds me a little bit of Don Quixote, with this character who just is like becoming completely fixated on the past and living in the past. And Judy Barton, her big spoiler alert here, but her character as Madeline Elster is really kind of a mirage of that, and him kind of falling in love with that. But then he goes and he tries to replicate that in real life, and what ends up happening is it just reveals itself as being a facade, and that destroys everything when he kind of shows that. So it's about, in essence, it's a movie about the dangers of trying to live in the past.
Do you also think, though, I feel like it's also saying that when you try to make a romantic relationship into something that it isn't, you don't actually love the person. There's so much there in the second half that's like, she's like, yo, you just want to go out with me because I remind you of her. And there's this, and obviously she knows what's going on. We don't know that she knows, but I I feel like a huge message is that when you try to conform someone to your image of them, whatever that is,
Yeah.
it's really insulting, and it's certainly not love, and it's kind of a rejection of acceptance
Yeah.
in a way,
Yeah.
because he just can't, literally cannot see Judy as herself at all, because that picture is, he wants it so much that it erases her
Yeah.
identity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Now the question, of course, is how does that tie into this kind of ghost story that we have going on? How does that bridge together?
Well,
Which
maybe he's more in love with a ghost than a real person. Like,
well, yeah,
maybe
I
the
think
entire time he doesn't really want someone real.
there's this thing. I think Freud said it once that you never really, what ends up happening is you only really fall in love once, and then after that you're just kind of chasing that same love over and over and over again, trying to replicate it.
Mm.
And I think that's kind of what that movie is doing.
That sounds like a description of addiction, because that is very frequently the description when it's like people are constantly trying to get back to the first high, the first drink, the feeling of the first
Yeah.
coming home feeling, and then you just can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and then we have like a side story in Vertigo, which drives me insane. Speaking of going mad, with Midge, where I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like, hello. Not only is this person that you should be with right in front of you, but also I'm kind of angry at Midge's characterization of like the ultimate, like, he's just not that into you person who just will not stop. And it's so embarrassing. And she's so frustrated, like when she does the painting and then is like, it's
Yeah.
like she can't stand herself. So it's maybe too close to home in terms of like what usually gets under my skin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a frustrating plot line, but I think it's such an important one because it just kind of highlights how crazy Scotty is becoming throughout that movie. I think that if you didn't have that there, you didn't have that kind of more objective perspective to compare him to, would be a much, not necessarily I guess a much more confusing experience. I don't know how to say that.
Do you think that if Vertigo weren't as exquisitely constructed as it is, that you would like it as much? How much of the way that it's done informs your
so like
proclivity towards it?
so that's a good question, because the problem is, and I'm just going to be completely honest with you, I still am not content with my understanding of that movie. I don't think I completely grasp it, so I don't know if I can judge it objectively in that sense of like what it's doing. If it were not as well put together as it is, would I like it as much? Maybe not. I don't know if I would understand it any more or better than I do, so I don't know if I can really judge that. But I think that what has definitely attracted me to it, studying wise, is how well Hitchcock has, edited and shot and done everything else.
See, like, okay, so I know that Psycho is not technically the 50s, it's 1960, but
Yeah.
Psycho is a perfect example to me of where craft meets story.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
the way that Psycho is done is as good as the story it's telling, is as good as the performances, the characters, the depth of it, the shock of it. So that to me is kind of Hitchcock's pinnacle of everything literally came together perfectly. And it's not just like I'm asking, because when I watch Vertigo, I'm asking myself, would I like this if it weren't so beautiful and so perfectly captured? But Psycho, I'm like, yeah, this is just a 10
Yeah.
out of 10.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, to me at least, there's a big relationship there between Psycho and Vertigo and Rear Window as well. I think there's kind of a
Voyeurs.
trinity. Yeah. Well, we'll talk a
Voyeurs.
little bit more about what he's doing with that. But in terms of both of them, I think the thing about it is it's Hitchcock. And you see this especially with Psycho, where it's just he has this way of a kind of almost misdirection where there's this quote I like, what a director directs is the audience's attention.
Mm.
So, and Hitchcock, he's on fire with that in both of those movies, I think, really just kind of directing us and misdirecting us and making us sympathize with a person we shouldn't be sympathizing with, now with someone we should be, now with someone we shouldn't, and just kind of dragging us back and forth. So in a way, it's like it's one of those things where I could point back to Psycho and say, okay, if you didn't have someone who had that kind of misdirection navigating you through the plot line, would it run as well as it runs? I don't know if it would. I definitely don't think Vertigo would do that as well. But
And it's almost like Jimmy Stewart. I don't know if you agree with this, but I almost feel like Jimmy Stewart is the villain of Vertigo.
oh yeah, yeah,
Not the husband or it. And like you're saying, I just watched Psycho and I love Norman. I'm sorry. I just feel so like I want to give him a hug and help him out. I'm not angry with him. And it's the same thing with Mason in North by Northwest. I think he's great. I'm almost kind of rooting for him because he's such a cool villain.
yeah.
And then I love Ray Milland and Dial M for Murder. He's
Oh
my
God.
favorite. Oh my, like I and I am on Grace Kelly's side 100%, but I love his character. I think Tony is great, and the whole time we are him as he figures things out. We're figuring things out, and we're like, what's he going to do? And then he's so competent and smart. I don't know. So Hitchcock is great at getting us on the side of the villains. I think that's an interesting read, but it's totally true.
Yeah, to me, that's one of my favorite things about him. He always talks about the audience. It's his favorite things. And one of the things that I think that he does, another character like this is L.B. Jeffries in Rear Window. It's like, well, I think the guy who killed his wife is kind of portrayed as an almost more sympathetic character in a way.
Yes,
like
I agree.
Yeah, at the end, it's just like, you see this guy come in and it's just like, what do you want from me? Do you want money? I don't have money.
But he says it it's so sad, Satchel. Like he's like, what do you want? I don't have any money. Like it's heartbreaking. And then you're like, just kill Jimmy Stewart. It's fine. I don't like him more than I like this guy. Honestly, he's just trying to live and be with his girlfriend. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
haven't we all been there?
But yeah, I think Hitchcock likes these. What he likes to do is kind of, I think, make the audience realize that they are not as good of people as they initially thought they were. He makes you sympathize with these characters, and then he has these like aha moments where he's like, "Oh yeah, I just made you." There's this moment with Norman Bates in Psycho where he's being investigated by Arbogast. Arbogast comes in and he's going through and flipping through the pages, and he goes, and Norm Bates goes, "Look, her name's not in there." He goes, "Well, I got a sample of her handwriting here," and you feel that anxiety suddenly with Norman.
I know.
As soon as he says that, you just immediately, it's like, oh, okay, this is he's gonna get caught here, and making you sympathize with someone like that and feel that kind of anxiety is just so. It's very Hitchcock, but it brings out something in people that I think is really interesting.
It's the same in perhaps the greatest one. I'm going to give Ray Milland my greatest, and then Norman Bates, and then I love the villains in Strangers on a Train, because that's another one where the main guy, you're just like, you're rooting for him because these people are so clever and very. You can also understand why they're doing what they're doing. I get it. Like the mom is awful, and I don't know. It's just. It's so great that he kind of puts us into those situations. And he kind of makes his main characters insufferable to a certain extent, where like, I watched The Man Who Knew Too Much a couple of days ago, and I was like, Doris Day is so grating, and like, I cannot stand her character. And so I don't know if that was intentional or not, but.
Well, my revelation, I really enjoyed that movie. I just rewatched it. My revelation about it is I think it's kind of a spiritual sequel to Rear Window, about what a terrible marriage L.B. Jeffries and Lisa would have if they actually ever got together. And that's what I was thinking about the entire time. I'm like, this would be awful. These two, just really
terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he drugs her. I think that was, I was like, no, I cannot stand this aggression. Will not stand, man. Like I was so just what is going on? And then he's like, I'm a doctor. It's fine. It's like, yeah, that's what they all say. Okay.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
can't.
yeah,
And then the kid was just, okay. Yeah. That was not my favorite, but
yeah, yeah,
I do see, I think that Jimmy Stewart in that one, Rear Window and Vertigo, is just a jerk. And his only saving grace is Rope.
yeah, yeah. Well,
That's the only time I like him.
it's so funny to me because he is, we look at him and I think of the movies that really come to my mind, of course, are movies like It's a Wonderful Life and Mr.
Of
Smith Goes to
course.
Washington. And it's just like he is the most likable. He's like the Tom Hanks of his generation. Just you're always on his side. You want to go give him a hug all the time and all this. And then he comes in these movies like Vertigo and Rear Window, and it's like this guy is a terrible human being, and I would not want to be even in the same room with him. And it's weird.
But Satchel, do you think that he's good at being terrible? That's kind of my argument. I don't
Yeah.
feel that he's good at it. Like, I was thinking about this when I was watching The Wrong Man. Henry Fonda is so frequently that, wronged nice guy. But
Yeah.
then in Once Upon a Time in the West, he's a crazy assassin, but
Yeah.
he is convincing as
Yeah.
that character. And so I think with Jimmy Stewart, what annoys me, apologies to anyone who thinks otherwise, is that I don't believe him. Like
Yeah.
I don't believe him as these characters. I believe him as like his character in Harvey and George Bailey and
Yeah.
Mr. Smith, but not, I don't know. I find it very hard to see him like this.
Well, it's interesting because I think that that's a little bit of what we're talking about with Hitchcock's point of it. It's, he's supposed to be kind of in the cultural view the good person, and so automatically we kind of trust him going right out as it's like, yeah, he's the good guy. He's going to be the good guy. He's going to make the good decisions, and he in a way almost sells it. It's like you don't immediately realize when you first watch Vertigo that this guy is terrible and not someone you want to be around. It's like you still,
Right.
even when he's being awful to Judy, it's like, it's Jimmy Stewart. He's the nice guy. He's the good guy. Why would you?
Why is he acting this way?
Yeah, yeah. So I think
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. I think that it's hard to see him as being terrible, but I actually think that's to the movie's benefits in both cases.
I think that it's the same thing that I feel with Cary Grant in Notorious. He's a jerk the whole time, and it's hard to see him like that. I don't know. Maybe this is my problem. Part of me just doesn't, I don't know if it's that I don't believe them or if I don't want to see it. But I think that, I don't know. Who do you think who is an example in Hitchcock where like the lead is just completely believable? I don't know. Maybe
What do you?
I think Cary Grant in North by Northwest is probably the closest to me of just being like his character for that actor is perfect.
Yeah. Do you mean in the sense of like perfect casting, or do you mean in the sense of like this is someone that we're supposed to sympathize with, and it's not Hitchcock being slight? Do you?
I mean, in the sense of like what we want to see this actor act as is this perfect thing.
Yeah.
Like the Cary Grant that I want the most is the Cary Grant in North by Northwest, not the Cary Grant in Suspicion or Notorious.
I would agree with that one. I would say Henry Fonda in the wrong man. I think that is like the most Henry Fonda role ever written for a human being.
Besides 12 Angry Men.
Yeah.
He's basically that guy.
Yeah, it's him. It's the Oxbow incident. It's the same character.
Oh, true.
Yeah, over and over again. But that's why it works. Is it's so human. It's just humanist. It's so good. But those are great. I don't know if anyone could have ever anticipated that Anthony Perkins would have been so great in Psycho, but he absolutely was. Like after that movie came out, I feel like that is Anthony Perkins. He just is that character.
And he was like 27 years old when he did it. Yeah, he was very young. The Wrong Man is an interesting one because that one, the villain is like the system.
Yeah.
Like, and we don't really get a personification of evil there, except for the forces that be just making it impossible for a decent person to, survive it.
Yeah. Just like 12 Angry Men, right? It's the
it's too many parallels.
Yeah.
Maybe Lumet saw it at a young age and was like, I'm doing this in a different way.
Yeah.
So which is your favorite of the decade, would you say?
You would be surprised by this. I actually think it's North by Northwest. I just love that
Yeah,
movie. Yeah,
I love it.
it's so much fun. I just don't care. It doesn't have the kind of weight that something like Vertigo has, or the kind of I don't think it's quite as done from a control standpoint as Rear Window, but it's just such a good vibe movie. I just don't
And
care
it's
so much.
also got so many great locations. It kind of feels Bond,
Yeah, yeah,
like in the way of the traveling and kind of the madcap mayhem
yeah,
thing. Not that Bond was ever like the wrong man trope,
yeah,
but it feels kind of that way. And then her character, Eva Marie Saint's character, reminds me a lot of like a Bond woman, like Vesper.
yeah. It definitely had a lot of influence on James Bond. I don't know if I would go quite as far as some people do and call it the first James Bond movie, but it definitely
No,
had a
no,
lot of influence on that. It's too everyman. Bond is more of a kind of like, high class British
good
society.
point.
This is the American everyman getting caught up in
Ad
some
man,
conspiracy. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I always love the ending to that movie. It's you get Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint trying to climb down Mount Rushmore, and it's like these indifferent American gods kind of just watching these two characters getting chased by these bad guys and not doing anything to help, even though there's kind of a Deus Ex Machina in the kind of final few seconds there. But
Right.
that always felt like the ending to like The Pit and the Pendulum to me, or something like that, where it's just like, oh, we got to throw this on because it would be too dark to let it kind of end, and the movie's too fun to kind of end it in that way. But yeah,
I really wonder if Spielberg did Catch Me If You Can based on North by Northwest, because when I was watching the credit sequence, I thought, oh, this is totally. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Catch Me If You Can seems, you know, an homage in a way to that,
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I hadn't actually thought about that, but making that point, that is, yeah, definitely. He's
and it's got planes. Uh, what do you think of like how Hitchcock does women? Because this is something I thought of asking you about when I was watching The Birds, and I'm curious to see if you feel like there's a common thread or a psychology through line between
oh,
these all blondes, all cool blondes in the 50s.
well, I mean, he has, there's a lot of things that kind of resurface again and again. Like there's the tyrannical mother figure. That's definitely something that's in like 90% of his movies. But a lot of his movies, if not all of them, kind of deal with this relationship between men and women, and just the way that they interact, and the way they can't ever seem to really understand each other, and the way that they just, butt heads. But there definitely is something there with blondes. The general consensus is that Hitchcock just liked blondes. I don't know if there's something more going on there, and it's supposed to symbolize something. If it is, I haven't figured it out yet. But that's definitely something that resurfaces a lot, I
Well,
would agree.
and the women are also very strong. I was
Yes.
thinking about this with Janet Leigh as Marion Crane, Tippi Hedren in The Birds, even though The Birds is the 60s, I'm still going to talk about it.
Yeah,
Birds,
yeah, yeah.
her character is very strong. Kim Novak's character is very strong. The women in Strangers on a Train, Grace
Yes.
Kelly is always so. It's interesting to me because I don't feel like even when there's a damsel in distress situation that Hitchcock presents women as such. Do you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
even though they
Yeah.
have they're in a lot of danger, and you can feel that they seem capable, which is an interesting portrayal, I think.
So this is one of my favorite things about Hitchcock. This is one of the things I kind of discovered studying him, and this is one of the places where I kind of break from the cultural consensus about him. So you mentioned earlier voyeurism. This is something that like happens as it's supposed to be watching, and there's a whole kind of very feminist reading of Hitchcock. Not feminist in that it's embracing him but kind of criticizing him, where it's about the male gaze and about how it's like, okay, this is about being watched and all this kinds of stuff. What I think is really kind of interesting is mentioning the damsel in distress kind of situation, especially in those three movies: Vertigo, Psycho, Rear Window. It's the men are not. It's not they're watching because they have like power. It's they're condemned to do nothing but watch. I mean, Scotty has to sit by and watch while Madeline falls off the church tower. Jeffries has to sit and watch while Grace Kelly is getting attacked in the apartment across the way. Norman has to sit and watch while his mother kills Marion Crane, even though it turns out it's actually him. He's still powerless about that situation. I think that's kind of the whole point, is that we as the audience, when we're watching a movie, we kind of make a contract with the director and we say, this individual, they're going to do things that are going to please me as the audience. I'm going to fall in love with these characters and things are going to turn out well. And it's like, well, okay, what if you fall in love with the characters and then really terrible things happen to them and we're just powerless to do anything about that? We just have to sit and watch and observe and not be able to do anything. And I think that's like Hitchcock as a provocateur. I think that's really kind of what he likes to do.
I wonder if that, I don't want to get weird about this, but you did mention Freud, so that's in my head now. I wonder if this is like an impotence thing, like the powerlessness is connected to like that in the face of, because this is something that's culturally going on, in the face of like strong, capable, autonomous women who don't seem to need men to help them. There is this factor of like, what am I good for?
Yeah.
Masculinity wise. And because that's also true in Man Who Knew Too Much, right? That Jimmy Stewart's basically that way the entire time because he can't get his son back. So I wonder if that's like, maybe that is why there's sort of this tendency in Hitchcock to kill the women or like torture them, because like in The Birds, she's really tortured. He kills off Janet Leigh. Like there's maybe this retaliation, and we see the voyeurism and we see the stalking and we see the desire, and then the men not be able to do anything about it, and then the women either get killed or are in massive danger. I wonder if that's in like retaliation to that inadequacy feeling.
It definitely could be. Thing about Hitchcock, one of the things about him to me is, so he absolutely knew his Freud, and it's not one of those things where it's like, if he's doing that, it's not a subconscious thing. I think it would be a little bit more
right.
If he was doing that, I think it would have been intentional. You just watch Spellbound and it's like, okay, that guy definitely was very much in touch with Freud and what he was doing. And I think about, like, you have the scene in The Wrong Man where they're interviewing his wife and she's explaining these kind of psychological things going on, and the scene in Vertigo where Scotty's on trial and they give this whole analysis of his conscience. And it's like, he loves to put stuff like that in his movies that are just, it just grounds them psychologically. It's
like Psycho, the end of Psycho.
Oh yeah. We're not going to, leave these questions unanswered. It's like, this is what's going on in these characters' heads, these weird phenomenon. And that is one of the things that seems to really exhilarate him. And also one of the things I love so much about him. But I think that there definitely is something going on there about this kind of idea of, maybe as women gain power, it's not so much I'm powerless, or that men are powerless. I don't know that men are powerless, but it's also like they're seeing the women they care about go into those kind of dangerous situations, and they might not be able to intervene as they have in the past. So the damsel in distress.
Right. Maybe it's a combination of that plus, like, I'm thinking of Marnie now, where I've always felt that Sean Connery's character was like a stand-in for the director in a way.
Yes.
Where it's like, I will make you want me. And you're saying no, but it's that feeling that's really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But that sort of rejection is maybe more something that he understands than otherwise, because that theme does keep coming on. The strong mother theme keeps coming, but then also the like, no thanks, I'm good. And then the guy's like, no, this just happened in Vertigo. This is why it's fresh on my mind, where Jimmy Stewart's like, no, but I saved you, and so I'm responsible for you now. It's like, what? So it creates this desire to rebel against that, even if he's well intentioned, or even if,
Yeah.
like in The Birds, the male character, I forgot his name, Rod. I don't know his real name, but
Mitch.
he's
Oh,
yeah, he's great, and
yeah,
he wants to help her, but then she's like, no thanks, and she really goes against any sort of like knight in shining armor trope,
yeah,
even though she falls in love with him regardless.
yeah, yeah. I definitely think there is something about that kind of a subversion of that knight in shining armor, so to speak, trope. Which that's interesting because that now makes me think again of Vertigo, and it's about how those tropes are kind of rooted in the past, and how that seems to be what Scotty is really kind of obsessed with there, you could say. How he even says, I'm responsible for you if I save your life, yada yada yada. And that, I mean, that's an older kind of ideal that he seems to want to kind of return to. But
It kind
doesn't.
of comes to makes me like, after watching all of these, my main question is like, what do men need? Like, according to Hitchcock, it makes me think a lot more about men than it does about women, strangely, even though
Yes. Yeah.
the women are typically the centerpiece. It
Yeah.
Because in like Rear Window, he is confined in a way. In Vertigo, he's confined, like he's got the cane, and
Yeah.
then the other one, he's in the wheelchair. And there's
And
this
in
sense of
Psycho.
like, and in Psycho, she's confined.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's something blocking men, perhaps, from being able to sort of take charge, maybe, or be in control of their own lives. And the women don't seem to have that problem, even though they're the ones in danger.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't think of
Sorry.
another director that who's like oeuvre is consistent across the board about this sort of gender dynamics that are so consistent here, unless someone's copying him, like De Palma frequently
Well, yeah,
does.
that's the whole kind of thing is that you could say there definitely are a couple people that I can think of that kind of do that, but the problem is we all look at them and say they're Hitchcockian, and that's the that's the end of it. He kind of, I think he, with that idea, the Kuleshov effect, I think he really kind of, I don't know if he necessarily invented that, but he definitely deployed that to that extreme. Kind of used the medium as far as it could go to explore those questions. But yeah, it's interesting. Um,
It is, yeah. I find it very interesting, especially for the time period. And I think that we are, as a culture in our art, coming back to this, but I think
yes,
maybe not in. It seems in a more detrimental way, in my opinion, because then it's, yeah, comes back to like what is the best way for men to be, I don't know, represented as strong or
yeah.
as capable.
Well, I mean, that was a question all the way back into those days. I mean, you think about back in the 40s and the 50s, there was the muscular Christianity movement because men were being culturally viewed as less than they had ever been viewed before. So suddenly there was this backlash of, oh, we have to get stronger now. But yeah, it's a question. I mean, I feel like every generation views men as more and more dangerous than they were before, and it's been doing that for a while. And I there's definitely something to that, but I think Hitchcock, he's a lot more subtle about it than most people are nowadays. There's definitely, like you said, you can understand in every one of these characters why they're doing what they're doing, and it's not just I'm a man and I'm insecure. It's I have this moralistic desire, like you see in Rear Window, or there's a desire for the past, as you see in Vertigo, or something like that, or mommy issues in Psycho.
Well, and you bringing up The Searchers kind of reminded me that that's what that used to be. you know, like you would never
Yes.
see a John
Yeah.
Wayne character as any of these guys. So
No.
it just sort of moved past that persona of like the cowboy would never be acting these ways. But I don't know if it's better or worse in terms of like psychologically, because
No.
there's
Yeah.
issues with both.
So with the Searchers, one of the things that I like so much about that movie is that even though you get to see him somewhat vulnerable, and still though, I mean, he's definitely a brute in that movie. It you get that final shot of the door closing on him, and it kind of is that acknowledgement that this kind of masculinity has no place in the civilized world. With Hitchcock, it's interesting because there's something malignant about that kind of masculinity, I think, that you see in his filmmaking. I mean, I think about it in those three movies. It's, again, there's like this kind of problem that needs to be cured about it, where all of these characters are confined, all of these characters are going through something terrible that seems. One of the things, I don't know if it's linked to masculinity, because it almost seems like it's linked to femininity in a weird kind of way. I mean, Scotty's mentioned wearing a corset, and Norman Bates has this issue with his mother that he can't seem to shake off, and Jeffrey's apartment is definitely a very feminine space throughout the movie. I mean, it's constantly women that are in there, with the exception of the detective that's his friend, but even then, there's always like a tension between those two. But yeah, I confess I don't know completely. It's definitely like the core question, I think, that Hitchcock is really interested in, is this relationship between the sexes. But yeah, it's a lot. He's dense with it. He's careful. um, yeah, Lord.
Yeah, I think it just made me think of like Shadow of a Doubt as well, and some of the older ones like Rebecca, where you're right. The like Laurence Olivier and Joseph Cotton in those two movies are a little bit more feminine,
Yeah,
and they seem to, yeah, it's almost like a trade where they are, and then the women are more, have like that, like the characteristics of otherwise. Very interesting, Satchel. I don't know. I'm sure that someone has written a book about this
oh,
and has studied it. We just need to find it.
there are many books about this, and I've even
Yeah.
read a decent amount of stuff about it. The problem is I don't agree with any of it. I always walk away and I say I don't think this guy has answered the question. You've talked a whole lot about the subject, but you haven't either you've made leeway, or what leeway you've had made seems to be a little bit shaky. So I don't know really about this. We'd have to ask Hitchcock, but he's kind of in the ground right now, so it's not really possible.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I
but
haven't really watched a ton of interviews by him either. So
yeah, well, he's fun. He's a lot of fun. He likes to tell stories in his interviews, and they can be a little bit like his movies. We'll just say that.
an enigmatic. Okay,
Yeah,
so what do you think? I'm gonna do a hard pivot here into
yeah,
like production design and
yes,
cinematography
yes.
and score. What do you think? What stands out the most to you, artistically speaking, of his films in this decade?
So, talking about the Kuleshov effect. So, do you know? Are you familiar with that? Have you?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So, just in case anyone listening is not, because I want to get into the technical side of this. What this is um, this is an effect Hitchcock uses all the time. And so, what it is, a character looks at an object, we get a shot of the object, and then back to the character reacting to that. So, this is looking at film as a language, and it's a language of images. What is so good about the Kuleshov effect is it is kind of like the alphabet of that language, and Hitchcock deploys this to great effect, because what it does is it lets him turn his lead actor into kind of the narrator of the story. Because what it is, you see an object, that's exposition, it tells you something, and then the reaction to that object endows meaning on whatever they just saw, so it means something to the audience. So in three shots there, you have created kind of the foundation for telling an entire story. And that, if you're just trying to do something using only images, that is very, very, very useful to getting an idea across. So editing wise, that definitely to me is where I think he's most brilliant. But going back to some of the other stuff, in both Rear Window and The Birds, I really like those movies because you do not get a lot of non-diegetic music. It's almost all just sound, which is very, very rare in the time that Hitchcock is making movies. Usually it's much more kind of operatic and the music is just telling the audience what to feel. But
Like
with
The Man Who Knew Too Much, that music is awful. I think that is the worst example of, just overwhelming amounts of this is how you should feel right now. And I think the Psycho score, Bernard Herrmann is awesome. The Psycho score is the best one, but it is also kind of aggressive.
yes, yeah,
So there's not really any subtleties in any of these, because the Vertigo one is also just very in your face. I do like the Dial M for Murder soundtrack the most, but that
yeah,
one is probably the most subtle of any of them.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like those. I love North by Northwest. I just think it's a really
That
fun
one's
score.
fun
Very,
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
very Bond-esque. Um, but yeah, it's interesting watching Rear Window. He will. There's so many little flourishes he will do with the sound in there. I mean, whenever you see Dornwald's apartment, you hear the sound of like a dump truck always going by. It's like just a very subtle way of building a little bit of dread there. But that's always good. I mean, he's like you were saying with Vertigo, his cinematography is always perfect. You know, there's no unmotivated camera movements, and he always knows exactly where to put the camera to kind of continue moving the story forward, which is a very useful thing. It's something a lot of people nowadays need to pay a little bit more attention to, but nobody really does.
I actually think the Wrong Man is one of the best in terms of editing, because that one
Yeah,
I kept noticing the leanness. Like on one end, I would put the Wrong Man as like tight and lean and kind of there's no excess, and then on the other end, I'd put To Catch a Thief, because that one is so indulgent
yeah, yeah,
and so it's beautiful, but it is
yeah,
not like we're trying to strip away anything here or like get to the point quickly. It is kind of it's very meandering and very, I don't know, it feels, I guess, like a vacation. Whereas like Wrong Man feels like the situation it is, where it's like a trial and, it's very serious and very bleak.
yeah,
But I think that he is fantastic at framing. North by Northwest, especially the overhead shots
yeah,
are beautiful. And you're like, or when he is waiting for the bus that he thinks is coming that isn't coming, and there's him and another guy in the sides of the road. He does that
yeah,
sort of shot a lot, where there's one person here, and then they're on the ends of the screen.
yeah. You got all that. You got that space between them to kind of
Yes.
show this gulf between the characters. Yeah, he's really good at stuff like that. I think my framing actually, my favorite of that one might be Psycho. There's just so many great moments where two characters are having conversations and he just shoots them in like the most perfect way to kind of tell the story. It's so good.
The only director I will say that I think maybe surpasses him in this way is Kurosawa, who is like a master at blocking, and the like he has three dimensionals where it's like this person's here, and there's this like
Yeah,
depth perception that goes on. But I think Hitchcock is very good at that as well, a placement of people. And like you're saying, the placement isn't just aesthetic, it's informing the narrative.
yes, yeah.
It's telling us
Um,
something about the plot.
Hitchcock, I think this is kind of a weird thing. I think Hitchcock's a better editor than Kurosawa is, but I think Kurosawa is better at just cinematography and in general, kind of that blocking. It's Hitchcock likes to direct. He likes to bring you into the space with the camera and not just set things up and leave them that way. It's like he really wants to pull you in there in a way that most, or well, I guess I don't know how common that was in the time. He definitely did it more than most directors I think were doing it at the time that he was making movies, but not as quite as urgently as some of the others.
And I
nowadays.
think Hitchcock is great at claustrophobia. I think he's
Yes,
great at
yes,
making you feel that you're in a confined space, even if you're not. Like Rebecca
yes.
just came to my mind, where the home feels stifling and repressive, and it's huge. It's a huge mansion.
Well, he is. I mean, they say he's the master of tension, and he loves to, when things get tense,
Good
he
point.
definitely likes to pull in very close to his characters at times. He doesn't always do that, which is because it could that can get really kind of obnoxious, but he definitely likes to as things accelerate sometimes. I think again, I go back to Psycho. I think about there's that whole conversation he has with between Arbogast and Norman Bates, where what he'll do is if you watch it, he will change camera angles depending on who's like winning the conversation. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thought of that sort of that idea when he was talking to what's his name, her boyfriend and
Sam.
Vera Miles, Sam. When
Yes.
they come
Yeah.
and they're questioning him, and Sam starts to get a little bit more aggressive and assertive towards him, and then he kind of shrinks. And at the beginning, he was more confident when they first arrived. And I feel like what you're saying happens where the camera is sort of almost part of their conversation in terms of, yeah, who's coming up on top and who's being
Yes.
diminished.
Yes. Yeah. You know, Psycho. That's a get kind of a weird movie for me because I had been so I've studied that movie for quite some time. But recently I was having trouble gelling with it. There was something about it that was kind of annoying me, which I think that might come as a surprise to you because it's such a kind of widely embraced movie, and I know it's one of your favorites. But there's a shot in that movie that just it always felt so fantastical that it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And it's so you get the motel, and then you get this big dark house up on the hill. I realized a couple weeks ago though. So that shot is kind of the movie as a total. Have you ever noticed that?
How do you mean?
So the motel, what it is it's this place of kind of free sexual transaction. You get the hotel at the beginning where she and Sam are meeting, and then you get this motel where it's like, you know, nobody really stops at a motel more than a night. And usually what it's used for back in the time is this is the kind of beginnings of sexual liberation. It's a motor hotel. You go stop there for a night. You can usually meet someone outside of the space of the home and have a sexual interaction that has no kind of bearing on anything else. And then you get this big old dark house, these kind of older ideals that's like sitting on top of that motel, like ruling over it in a way and preventing that from taking place, like kind of trying to control this freeform
Mm.
sexuality with this shame. Just like Norman's mother
Yeah.
is trying to control
I've
him.
never thought of it that way, but yeah, that's totally true. It's also that, like, I think the home represents like childhood and maybe innocence and just repression. So that's kind of like towering over his ability to be free, and even not just in a sexual way, but just in like a personal way. It's like
Yeah.
Norman has to go to the hotel to have any sense of ownership over himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an accurate metaphor. I don't know. What would you say in terms of that being maybe what the actual birds represent? Because I feel
Oh,
like
yeah.
that's also, yeah, the birds themselves are sort of similar to what you're describing there.
So one of the final shots of the birds ever, the birds is a movie that people usually talk about as not really having a conclusive ending. But the second, like the couple of the last shots of that movie are what's her name, Melanie Daniels, Tippi Hedren is in the back of the car with Mitch's mother, and Mitch's mother has kind of been this force that's been repelling her away, and it's notably that whenever Mitch's mother gets pissed off, that's when the birds attack. It's like, okay, this is a
Exactly.
very clearly she
Okay.
is a very destructive force. She
Yeah.
she's in the back of the car, and they have that brief interaction where Melanie looks up at the mother looks down at Melanie, and finally lets Melanie rest her head on her shoulder, and then that's the end of the movie. Is it's like, okay, she's finally accepted her into the home. And birds in that era of Hitchcock, I'm pretty sure do represent um what is it, maternity, because you have it in Psycho as well that he has all the stuffed birds in his
Yes, I
parlor,
know.
and
I
that
kept
very
thinking that the whole
clearly,
time. Yeah. Yeah.
yep, represents his mother, his this thing that's stuffed and is dead and shouldn't be able to have any bearing over his life, yet still somehow definitely does. And
Hanging
Hitchcock
on
plays
the
with the
wall.
editing there too. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so Satchel, to conclude, if nobody had
Yes.
seen any Hitchcock movie in their life, which is
Yeah.
I think that would be a hard person to find unless they're
Yeah.
really young.
I found a
What
couple of
what
them.
do
Yeah.
you yeah, what do you think is the best entry point, and then what do you think is his masterpiece?
Oh, the best entry point is definitely Psycho. Um,
Okay.
his masterpiece, I don't
Yeah.
know. I
I,
like I said, I'm a huge fan of North by Northwest.
North by Northwest. Right.
Yeah, if you want to like make movies or understand how editing works or anything like that, Rear Window is like his gift in that sense. I know his favorite of his movies is always Shadow of a Doubt, which just shows
Yes.
how messed up of a person he is.
Uncle
But
Charlie.
his
Yeah.
Yep, good old Uncle Charlie. But yeah,
Yeah.
his masterpiece. I don't know if he has one. The thing about Vertigo, everybody talks about that one as being his masterpiece, but it's the one movie he has that's I don't feel any laughter in. Every movie that he has, I can just kind of feel him sitting in the back of the theater laughing at the audience as we react to whatever comes up on screen. But that one he feels very serious with. It's very tragic. So I don't know if that would make it his masterpiece, but it's definitely his most grounded movie in a way in that sense. Excluding the
Yeah,
wrong man, but that's kind of a weird one.
I would give masterpiece status to Psycho only, and then my favorite is Dial M for Murder, and that I think that will always be those are my 2 5-star ones
Hitchcock.
because Dial M is it's just so perfect and so enjoyable. I could turn it on anytime. Same with North by Northwest, but those are probably the 2 where you could just like turn it on and
Yeah.
just enjoy yourself and find something new in it that you like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Well, Satchel, thank you so much for joining me on this. I watched 10 Hitchcock movies in 2 weeks, and I had seen. I think we had talked about this where we both saw all of them, right? You've seen the entire collection, and I have as well. When I was a teenager, I got majorly obsessed and had a DVD collection of all of them, and I just like binged them in chronological order, which I should not have done. You should never do that because then you'll end on Family Plot. But
Well, you
that's
can.
not.
You can actually. I don't know. That might be better than ending on Frenzy. That's a pretty
Frenzy.
bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
It
pretty
starts
bad
to go
ending to it.
downhill. It's
Yeah.
not in my
Yeah.
friend Zig's opinion because he loves Topaz and Torn Curtain. But my opinion is after the birds, we're kind of.
Yeah.
I guess
Well,
if we want to be nice to Marnie.
he gets weird. Starting with Psycho,
Yeah.
he gets really strange, and he starts doing his kind of interesting stuff. You have Topaz and Torn Curtain as 2 Cold War movies, and then you get Frenzy, which is, I mean, it's almost like a giallo. It's just like he just is
Good point.
going
Yeah.
all over the place with that. It's a good movie, but it's one, I don't know if it would be one that I would like to end on with him. And then Family Plot is, by that point, he's just kind of doing it because why not? But
yeah.
yeah.
I will say I do think an underrated one that nobody likes except for me is The Trouble with Harry. That one is like
I don't find any problem with that. I think it's a pretty fun movie.
I really enjoyed it. It's so strange, but it's very kind of, I don't know. It's an entertaining one that's does not feel like Hitchcock at all. I have no idea why he did it, but it's really fun.
Yeah.
So that would be my hidden gem recommendation.
Yes,
Probably
yeah,
is The Trouble with Harry.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Satchel, thank you very much. I hope that everybody tunes into Hitchcock for the holidays on the Criterion channel. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you at the movies.